Hi everyone, I'm Sam Bowman. I'll be going over some background points about the sort of NLP crowdwork ecosystem that don't fit well in any one of these sections, but we think will be useful advice to someone trying to do this kind of work. First, I'll very briefly talk about the landscape of platforms. We'll mostly be talking in this tutorial about Amazon Mechanical Turk. This is the largest, oldest active marketplace for crowdwork. It's fairly flexible. It has a pretty powerful API and supports arbitrary custom code. It's oriented toward work that's broken down into typically 1 to 10 minute micro tasks, and it typically draws on workers coming from the US or India, often part-time, often college educated. Upwork uses a slightly different model. For Upwork, you hire workers for jobs individually and specifically. People will submit applications stating their qualifications for a particular task. This means that gigs tend to be broken into larger pieces, sort of hours or days of work rather than minutes. It's also oriented toward hiring specialists, people who can sort of show concrete qualifications. The pay tends to be fairly high. We'll talk about Mechanical Turk pay later, but on Upwork, gigs over $25 an hour are standard, and much higher numbers do show up for some areas. But you can really get quite specialized, quite high quality work. For example, I know of a project, I believe from Byron Wallace at Northeastern, that involved recruiting doctors as crowd workers through Upwork. There are many others available. For now, we're just going to focus on Mechanical Turk. So Mechanical Turk is built around this basic workflow that is useful to understand sort of all the ways that we're going to deviate from it. Basic setup of Mechanical Turk is that workers and requesters are us, sort of researchers or project managers who are paying Mechanical Turk, join the platform. There's no training or experience required on either side. Anyone can do either, more or less, as long as you can link your bank account. A requester then designs a simple UI to collect data that can essentially sort of take an input or a prompt from some requester managed database, show it to worker, get some response back, record that response. The requester then combines that UI with some data, maybe just a CSV file, to turn it into a stack or a set of hits, human intelligence tasks. Each one of these is one of these micro tasks. So these each will wind up represented an individual small job that pays a fixed amount, usually sort of pennies or a few dollars, and then deposits money in escrow to sort of fund those hits. Then over the following hours or days, workers will sort of search through Mechanical Turk and choose hits that they're interested in and complete them one by one. Requesters then are expected to quickly review the work that gets submitted and approve it if the work was actually done as specified, which releases payment to the worker. That's the basic setup. This doesn't work very well. Without any extra sort of tricks or workarounds, this is a disaster. So there's this sort of nice economic theory idea, the market for lemons. This term refers to sort of a lemon as a poor quality used car. That explains nicely why this breaks down. The quality of goods traded in a market can degrade in the presence of information asymmetry between buyers and sellers, if the person buying something doesn't know as much about it as the person selling it. The buyer, in deciding what they're willing to pay, will look at the average quality of everything on the market. But the seller, who knows the specific value of the stuff that they're selling, is incentivized to try to sell lower quality goods, or in our case, lower quality services, since they'll be paid the average price in any case. Good workers, or good sellers, are then pressured to leave the market because they're paid less than the actual value. They're paid based on the sort of average of relatively low quality work, even if they are doing higher quality work or selling higher quality services. The result is you get this downward spiral of the sort of average quality of goods or services in a market. Mechanical Turk fits this definition very nicely. You set a pay rate based on the average of what you expect to see from all of the workers in the platform, but workers sort of have some ability to control the quality and thoroughness of their work. One of the ways this hashes out is in the median pay rate for workers in Mechanical Turk. These numbers are a few years old, but the latest numbers I have are a fairly horrifying $2 an hour. Again, for a platform that has I think a majority of workers based in the U.S., which is far lower than minimum wage and far lower than the real prevailing higher wages for a lot of the kinds of work that are reflected on Mechanical Turk. A large majority of the marketplace is actually making these really low amounts. Only 4% of workers surveyed earn more than $7.25 an hour. This is not necessarily because most requesters in the market are behaving badly. The average requester pays more than $11 an hour, but it's that there are a relatively small number of very, very low-paying requesters who post enormous amounts of very low-paying work that sort of dominates the dynamics of the marketplace. So Mechanical Turk is very widely supported. A lot of tools are built around it. There are reasons that as a researcher or a project manager, you might want to use it. But it's worth being aware that you're participating in this very dysfunctional market. So how do you do good work in this very strange environment? First, don't take standard guidance from the Mechanical Turk UI and tutorials all that seriously. It looks from the outside like Amazon has kind of given up on maintaining or developing Mechanical Turk. It's still very active, it's still fairly standard in NLP, but it can be difficult to get customer support, and you will frequently encounter features of the Mechanical Turk platform that are broken or misleading. So you'll very often need workarounds. First, how do you recruit trustworthy workers? How do you make sure that people working on your hit are people you actually want to be working on your hit? So there are some simple answers that Amazon provides that are not great. You can filter workers by experience level. This is something you'll commonly see, including in NLP papers, where you limit hits to be completed only by workers who have a certain amount of experience on the platform. Say they've completed at least 5,000 hits, and no more than 2% of them have been rejected. But there's Kummerfeld at this year's ACL point out why this is not great practice, because this is requiring workers to have spent a good deal of time working in the open, unrestricted, sort of unfiltered market, which mostly consists of these very, very low-paying, potentially very frustrating hits. So you're only allowing workers who put up with a very, very defective marketplace to get to you. Not generally good practice, either ethically or in terms of the quality of work. So try to avoid this mechanism as much as you can. Amazon also has an option that lets you pay extra to use only workers that Amazon have vetted to be reliable. The consensus among requesters and researchers, as far as I know, is that this is effectively meaningless. This does not actually do much that anyone can tell to improve the quality of your experience or of the work you get. Most of the workarounds for this rely on qualifications. A qualification is effectively a tag that you can assign to workers sort of user IDs, that you can then use to restrict hits. You can say sort of hits can only be completed by workers who've been assigned a certain qualification. A typical setup involves posting a fully public, sort of unrestricted training or practice or qualification hit that workers can only do once. They're limited to doing only 5 or 10 minutes worth of work for you. Once they've done that very small sample of work, you manually review the work that's coming in. You look at their responses or you check them in some way. And if they're good, you use the responses to issue a qualification to that worker that allows them access to all of the remaining hits in your batch, that allows them to do the actual body of work. And you periodically spot check the work that's coming in from each worker. And if a worker starts doing lower quality work, you revoke the qualification to prevent them from participating in future hits. It's worth noting, you shouldn't reject work. You shouldn't actually use the reject button unless the work that you're getting is very clearly spam or fraudulent. It's because rejection revokes payment for work that's already been done. This is legally and ethically very dicey if there's any chance that the person who submitted work was actually making a real effort to do your task and just misunderstood or made a mistake. So be very careful about rejections. Similarly, Amazon has a block tool that lets you block workers from doing any hits that you're involved in. Usually it's safer to disqualify workers using the qualification tool because blocking workers can have somewhat complex downstream effects on their ability to use the platform. So again, only use the block tool if you're very confident someone is trying to defraud you. In addition to this, you can layer on quality control measures that try to allow you to get data quality coming out of your pipeline that's higher quality than you get from any one individual worker. If you're collecting a test set for a classification or an annotation task, say annotating the sentiment of sentences, it's common to have several workers annotate each example. So build in some redundancy where you get several labels for each data point. You can then aggregate those labels to get a sort of more confident final label. And there's some fancy statistical methods out there that can help do sort of better aggregations, better distillations of multiple labels into a single label than you get by plain majority vote. When you can't combine multiple parallel annotations, for example, when your task involves writing, it's hard to just automatically merge multiple people's answers to the same question, for example, if they're written free text answers. You can do a two-step process where a single worker attempts to complete a hit, but then several other workers double-check the quality of that work in one way or another, allowing you to only keep the examples that other workers consider to be high quality. To build a UI for very simple tasks, Amazon's tools actually can work reasonably well. Amazon has very simple tools built on HTML forms, templates that you can edit that work well with their CSV-based tools. And you can also add in, sort of use these tools, but add on some simple JavaScript snippets to do things like validate responses, to do things like making sure someone doesn't click submit before filling out all the fields. For more complex or interactive tasks, there are more powerful tools that integrate with mTurk that you can use. This is a pretty broad ecosystem. There are a lot of great projects out there. There are a lot of sort of deprecated or broken projects out there. So we can talk to people one-on-one about what tools have tended to work best for getting high-quality mTurk UIs. And another important aspect of this process to keep in mind is your reputation among workers. Most of the more ambitious, the more reliable workers, the people on Mechanical Turk who are trying to do serious data work and make a real living on it, will use mechanisms outside of the Mechanical Turk platform to judge the quality of requesters and the quality of hits. Which forums and which plugins they use will change from year to year, but the Turker Nation forum and the Turkopticon or CrowdWorkers plugins are a reasonable place to start. You can log in there. You can sort of see your own reputation as a requester there, which can be helpful. And because the people who use these tools, because more ambitious, more careful workers tend to use these tools, your reputation here can actually make a very big difference to the quality of work that you get. To maintain a good reputation, you want to be sort of a good citizen of the platform. This means a bunch of things. You want to pay well above minimum wage and what you think would be a reasonable wage for someone with the appropriate experience to do your work. You should have very clear and fair criterion for when you will issue bonus payments, when you will reject work, when you will block workers. Typically, there's an FAQ document that you'll have either built into your UI or linked from your UI that specifies this. You should be responsive. If workers hit questions or problems, you should respond within a day at the very longest. You should design your hits to be usable and efficient. You shouldn't add. You should be very careful to avoid sort of extra button clicks or interface elements that have to be done with a mouse rather than keyboard shortcuts. You should identify yourself clearly. If you're working with a large institution like a company or university, that should be clear. Your instructions to the task should be pretty comprehensive for how to handle edge cases or especially UI bugs or weird or broken examples. And finally, you should make sure that your hit pay rate is relatively constant, that the amount that people are earning per hour doesn't vary that much from hour to hour. So for example, if you're asking people to read some text as part of your hit, don't make it the case that some hits ask you to read 3 sentences, whereas some other hits ask you to read 3 pages without also separating out the pay rates and marking those hits as sort of different subtypes of hit. To estimate the hourly wage, to have a guess of how much you actually are paying, or to sort of set your pay rate, Amazon has a tool that will tell you how much you're paying, which is not very trustworthy. I'm not completely sure what method it uses, but the numbers it produces can be very strange. It can be off by quite a good deal. So instead, I think the standard practice is to start, just do the work yourself. Try doing the hit yourself for an hour or so and see how long it takes. And once your hit is live, once people are actually starting to do it, look at your reputation and look at reports about your hit on tools like Crowdworkers and Turk to get better estimates of how much time workers are taking. And finally, some comments about just best practices when using Handle Turk in the context of the kind of research that many of us here at EMNLP will do. If you are writing a paper that the primary purpose of which, or a major purpose of which, is to describe data that you're collecting, it's increasingly standard, I believe it's even required in most ACL venues, to specify the effective rate that you're paying. This is the thing that the reviewers and area chairs will ask you for. And you should make sure you know this number. You should know how much you're paying on average, and you should make sure that this number is not embarrassing or illegal where you're based. Another kind of basic sort of professional and legal obligations point: if you're studying your workers, if your workers, rather than sort of just doing work for you that is helping you complete a project, are themselves subjects of research, are themselves sort of a population you are trying to understand, think about institutional review board reviews. If you're doing the kind of project where it's relatively clear that you're doing human subjects research, this includes most linguistic style projects and some more sort of NLP data collection style projects, and you're based at a university and you're going to publish your work, you're generally going to be required to have an approved protocol with your university's institutional review board approving your practices.